Hi, I'm Carrie Corbett Owen, and today I'm honouring Dr. Ellen Langer, whose work has been so pivotal to the writing of my new book, Your Body Song: 18 Minutes to Health, Happiness and Longevity. Dr. Langer is a professor of psychology at Harvard University, and in 1981 she became the first woman ever to be tenured in psychology at Harvard. She is the author of hundreds of research articles, and her work has been cited thousands and thousands of times. She's known as the mother of mindfulness and positive psychology. She has 4 Distinguished Scientist Awards, as well as the Liberty Science Genius Award. And not only that, she's a best-selling author and a fabulous artist. Welcome, Dr. Ellen Langer, to Coffee with Carrie. Our current orthodoxy about health seems to be that if you just eat enough superfoods and broccoli, if you work out at the gym and you stay thin, you'll be healthy. But that's not quite what your research shows. So I'm curious about how you would sum up what your research shows.
Okay, well, I have a lot of research over 40 years, so it's hard to sum it up in a single word or two. But let me first say that right now, the world believes that the physical is more important than the so-called mental. And for me, stress is the major culprit with respect to health, and the absence of stress then leads to the absence of illness. The work that I've done over all these many years, parts of it can be understood as testing this mind-body unity idea. And mind-body unity, and I start with the idea, you have a mind, you have a body, these are just words. And if we put the mind and body back together, then wherever you're putting the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. Now, stress is a psychological phenomenon, so that you can see once you're without stress, the mind and the body are both perfectly fine. This mind-body unity explains things like placebos, spontaneous remissions, a host of things that the medical world can't explain. So we did many, many studies testing this mind-body unity idea. And the first one was a study that's called the counterclockwise study. I refer to this as a famous study only because, not being boastful, but because there's an episode on The Simpsons where they actually describe the study. This is The Simpsons Go to Havana, so which was fun. But the idea was very simple. We took old men and we had them live for a week in a retreat that was retrofitted to 20 years earlier. And everything they did was based on embodying their younger selves. So they spoke about the past and the present tense. The retreat was fitted to 20 years earlier, all the props and everything else. And so they lived this way for a week, and in a time as short as a week, their hearing improved, their vision improved, their memory improved, their strength, and their appearance. We had photographs of them before we did this, and then photographs after the week, and we showed them to people who knew nothing about the study, and they were indeed seen as having gotten younger. Now, truth be told, they didn't look 20 years younger, but still younger was good enough. So for me, this was very exciting because I don't remember, and still to this day, even though we did that in 1979, I haven't heard of old people showing an improvement in vision and hearing, even with medical intervention. And this was without any medical intervention. And then we went on to do many, many studies. I'll give you a few if you're interested in them.
Can I go back and just revisit this counterclockwise study? Because for me, it's such an important body of work. I know you're about to replicate it in Milan, and it's been replicated in
We
other
did
places
replicate it
as well.
in Milan already.
Oh, they have?
It's been replicated in several places. So anyway,
Fantastic.
what is your question?
So I was curious by your instructions to them when they started this retreat, because one of the things that I did for the research into my book, which is called Your Body Song, was to study extreme survivors. So people who have lived to over 100, but with good health. And what I found that really surprised me was that it wasn't so much their human doings as their human beingness that I thought made the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And your instructions to this group when they came to the monastery, if I understand it correctly, was to be as you were, 20 years ago. Am I correct in that?
Yes, and that they were going to be speaking about the past in the present tense. So in all ways to help them just be their younger selves. You know, most people set all sorts of limits for themselves and assume there are all sorts of things that they can't do. And this was a way of getting around those negative views and just be who you were. And then all of the strengths endemic to that earlier time would reveal themselves as they
And they
seem to
truly
have.
were themselves as younger beings. So when I read your book, I can see that they really got involved in the arguments of the current day 20 years ago. They listened to the music of that time. Everything about that monastery was designed to take them back to that time so that they could truly be who they were 20 years ago rather than just reminisce about it, correct?
Right. We had a control group that was reminiscing. But even for them, there were improvements, just not as much as those who stepped back in time. And the reason for that was here, you know, when people, especially in the United States, when people are old, they tend to be over cared for. And the assumption is that you can't do something, it's because you're old, even though younger people can't do a lot of things and are on occasion forgetful and so on. But so we take care of the old. Here, they were thrown into an environment without anybody caring for them. They had to take care of themselves. And the environment was novel. And that novelty meant that it was going to provoke their mindfulness. And as a result of that, they too, as I said, showed improvements.
So, Dr. Langer, you talk about mindfulness, and I think you get a contemplative mindfulness, and then you get the Langerian vision of mindfulness. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Well, first of all, many people think that meditation is mindfulness. Meditation is not mindful. It's a process you go through to lead to post-meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as we study it, is more direct, simpler in many ways to get to the same place. It's the simple process of noticing new things. And as you notice new things about the things you thought you knew, you realize, gee, you didn't know them as well as you thought you did. So your attention naturally goes there. You know, lots of very well-meaning people say, be in the moment, and that's sweet. But it's an empty instruction because virtually all of us are mindless almost all the time, and we're oblivious to it. So when you're not in the moment, you're not there to know you're not there, so you can't make the correction. So this active noticing puts you in the present, makes you aware of context. It's this active noticing is the essence of engagement, and our research shows that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. So you feel good, and whenever you're feeling, you know, if you were going to, you're in California now?
Oh, I'm actually in Washington.
Oh, Washington, even better. Okay, so that if you're going to come visit me, I'm on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and if you've never been here, you wouldn't have to tell yourself, you know, gee, I have to notice new things, because it would be new for you. You would naturally notice it. And when people travel, they feel that extra energy and have a good time. And whenever we're having a good time, it's because we're engaged. And the way to become engaged is the simple noticing. Now, you know, so we teach people just, you know, walk out the door, notice 5 new things, 3 new things. You go to work, notice 3 new things about what you're doing, about the people around you, so on and so forth. It's an easy thing to do. But if I were to tell you one thing to make you more mindful, would be to appreciate the inherent uncertainty in everything. And that when everything's changing, everything looks different from different perspectives, so that once you realize you don't know, you naturally tune in. So you can either start off really knowing you don't know, and that's hard because schools, parents, everything around us is always telling us things in absolutes. And so we really do think we know. So when I'm giving talks, I often throw out things to make people aware, but they don't know. I might ask you, for instance, how much is 1 and 1? And dutifully, you're going to say 2. However, 1 and 1 is not always 2. If you're adding 1 pile of laundry to 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1. If you're using a base 10 number system, 1 plus 1 equals 2. If you're using a base 2 number system, and many people don't even know there are different number systems, but 1 plus 1 is written as 10. So that when you recognize, independent of context, If somebody asks you a question, the answer is almost always, it depends. Is 1 and 1 2? Well, maybe, maybe not. And so when you come to really appreciate that you don't know, everything is new again, everything becomes exciting.
And from what I read in your research as well, that engagement even shows up in things like art. So if you're doing art mindlessly and you're doing art and you're engaged with it, people can tell the difference.
Yes, yeah. In all the things that we do, not only that, but that when we ourselves are being mindful versus mindless, people can see the difference. And in our culture, you have expressions like the lights on, but nobody's home. That somehow whether the person is there or not. And so we have lots of data where when people are mindful, they're seen as more charismatic, more trustworthy, and basically they're more attractive, which of course makes clear why relationships are better when people are mindful.
Yeah. So, Dr. Langer, one of the things that just came to me as I was listening to you saying this, the difference between mindless and mindful is that I listen to lots of YouTube interviews of, people whose work I admire. And I have seldom to listen to an interview where someone quotes your counterclockwise study, where they get it right that these men gained on average 3 pounds. They all say that they lost 3 pounds. And I was wondering what you think that says about how our culture lulls us.
Yes, well, that's part of the problem, that people seek certainty. And then they take that information, those certain things about which they're certain, and then just generalize them. I wrote a grant many, many years ago on the possibility. This was before we had as much of an understanding as we do today about dementia. And so at that point, people who were having problems when they were older were called senile. And I wrote a grant about senility as possibly being a mindful response to an overly routinized environment. So if you imagine and you're looking at the ceiling and you're noticing little things that other people don't notice, that from a social perspective, it seems bizarre and not positive, but from a biological perspective, that active noticing could be good. At any rate, they sent back the responses. They just couldn't get it. They kept changing it, thinking that when I was saying mindful, that I meant mindless, in the same way as, most people want to lose 3 pounds. And so they can't understand it being an advantage for somebody thin to gain 3 pounds. I had forgotten that finding in my work.
It strikes me that you're a researcher who is often way ahead of your time. And it's almost like you're doing work which is so vital and so important and yet difficult to get published because it's so far out of the realm of people's current ideas about health. And yet, as we now see people, other research is starting to catch up and look at your work afresh with new eyes and say, wow, look at the study that was done in 1979. Yeah. And so it's almost like you're a bit of a maverick, and I'm sure you've met your fair share of skeptics and critics.
Well, yes, it's interesting because one of my colleagues says that I'm from the future, but most of the time I'm oblivious to the fact that whatever I'm thinking, designing an experiment, before I get to the design phase, that I'm the only one who believes this. So it's not as if I have all that courage and I say everybody thinks X, no, they're all wrong. I mean, now I do more of that now that I'm older. But when I was younger, most of it was just my being oblivious, I think. Possibly.
So what do you think it is from your childhood that makes you think in such different terms than other people?
Yeah. I was very, very fortunate. I had parents that were extremely supportive, loving people. And and I think that it was really just that simple. So that right from the start, I'd have a little friend who would be upset about something, and I'd say, oh, but why don't you look at it this way? So turning things around just became the way I saw the world. That I didn't, people talk often about reframing bad things that happen to you. And I've never had to reframe. The positive frame was the one that occurred to me in the first place. then I get a little older and I realize that things in themselves are neither good nor bad. It's the way we understand them, and which gives us a tremendous amount of control over our well-being.
Yeah. So, Dr. Langer, you speak about your father in such loving terms in Counterclockwise, and you relate the story about how he remembers the things that he forgets, and yet he forgets the things that he remembers. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that, because we seem to have so many memory care centers and so much more, diagnosis of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something so important in that small story about your father.
Well, I thought the story you were going to point to is I was playing cards with him. He was at this point in a nursing home, and I'm saying to myself, should I let him win? And I'm really struggling with this. And while I'm struggling with this, he then says Jim, so he beat me. And the point of that really is that we tend to over assimilate whatever is going on to whatever the problem is, so that if somebody has dementia, we act as if they don't remember anything, and so on. And rarely is it the case that people don't remember anything. So we're doing some work now. We have a new program of work on what I call attention to symptom variability, which is a fancy way of talking about being mindful. And with memory, that if instead of assuming that the older person, the younger person, anybody doesn't remember anything, we paid attention to what they remember and what they forget, there'd be many fewer things that we saw that they forget. And then we could ask, well, why did they forget this and not these other things? And that in doing that, turns out one can improve memory. Or all sorts of diseases. People, let's say stress. People think they're stressed all the time. Nobody is stressed all the time. Nobody is anything all the time. And that, but what happens is when you're not stressed, you're going about living. So you're oblivious to the whole notion of stress. Then you're stressed. So if you become aware when you're stressed, you're not aware, then you're aware again when you're stressed. It seems that stress is pervasive. So we call people throughout the day and ask them how they are, and is it better or worse than they were before, last time we called. And the first thing that happens is by saying it's not the same, they immediately feel better because they thought they were maximally stressed all the time. And then the question is, well, why are you stressed now or less stressed now than you were before? So you might recognize that when you're talking to your friend, you're not stressed, but when you're talking to Ellen Langer, you are stressed. Then the solution is easy. Don't talk to me. All right, or talk to me differently. And so, but we've done this very simple thing with lots of big diseases. We're doing it with ALS now. We've done it with MS. We're working with Parkinson's, stroke, chronic pain, and so on. And the simple key is to notice when you don't have the symptom. Most people only notice when they have the symptom. So it's the same thing for memory, for Alzheimer's, or the beginning, mild cognitive impairment, before it gets really bad. When people talk about memory, I laugh in a certain sense because I give exams as a professor. And it's not the case that all of the students remember everything. So these are Harvard students. So these are the best of the best at the prime of their lives when memory loss is not an issue. When you're 20 years old and you forget something, it's no big deal. You just forgot it. When you're 80 years old and you forget something, you worry, and everybody around you worries about whether you're becoming senile. And it's sort of like when we become older, we're not allowed to make errors. We're not allowed to drop anything, to misplace anything, and so on. All the things that we did just as commonly when we were younger. Now, it's not to say that there isn't any memory loss as you get older.
Yeah. Well, I run 4 Airbnbs, and most of my guests are young people, and you would be alarmed at how much stuff I have to post back. I mean, it's literally, I just have to chuckle because it is so common that, young people leave things. So that's just...
No, I wouldn't be alarmed, but I would imagine other people. And when you point it out to people, no one is alarmed. Everybody knows they forgot things when they were younger.
Yes.
But it wasn't a signal of something worse, coming down the road as it is as you get older.
Yeah. Talking about perception, I was really intrigued by the research that you did with diabetics and how just by changing their perception, you were able to change their blood sugar levels. Can you tell me
Yeah,
a little bit about those? There was the research that you did with labels and one with clocks.
yeah, okay. Well, these were more recent tests of the mind-body unity idea. So what we did was have people who had type 2 diabetes show up for a study. They were going to play computer games, and there was a clock next to the computer. All this will make sense in a moment. And they were told, change the game you're playing around every 15 minutes or so to make sure they'd look at the clock. Now, for a third of the people, the clock was going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock was going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it was real time. And the question we were asking is, would blood sugar level follow real or perceived time? And it followed perceived time. Most of what we suffer, I think, is under our control. And eventually, I think that people will become more and more aware of this. You know, that in another study in diabetes, they presumed they were drinking sugar, a sugar drink, their blood sugar went up. When they, another group that didn't believe this, there was no change in their blood sugar. In another study, we had people in a sleep lab, and before they wake up, we changed the clock. And so again, a third of them thought they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, a third of them 2 hours fewer, or they got the amount of sleep that they actually got. And again, biological and cognitive functioning seem to follow perceived amount of sleep rather than real amount of sleep.
So it's almost like our brain really doesn't know the difference between what is real and what is imagined.
Yeah, well, what is real? You know, that it can't really know, you know, that when you look at something, you may see it one way, I may see it another way. We're not getting the direct response from that stimulus. And so, yes, it's all perception.
So, Dr. Lange, if you look at our medical system today, most of us believe that there are absolute truths. You know, you have cancer, you don't have cancer. What would you say to someone who's just recently been given a diagnosis with it being sort of an absolute truth?
Well, the first thing is that all medical knowledge, all knowledge that's deduced from science, can only be probabilities. That's all science can give us. You do a study, and the results of the study tell us that if you were to do the exact same thing, which you can never do, you're likely to get this finding. That's translated in books, textbooks, magazines, whatever, and just discussion as absolute fact. And so the first thing is to make them aware that the diagnoses are questionable. You know, it could be the cancer, that the response to that cancer could be, you know, and so on, just to make them a little less certain of the link between that diagnosis and the symptoms they expect and the prognosis they're expecting. The research that they're reading about, or that their physicians are reading about, is at least 5 years old. And lots of things have changed. Medical data tend in general to be based on an incomplete database. And what I mean by that, let's say, you know, you have a tumor that's, I don't know, the size of an apricot. That we don't, it doesn't matter how large it is to tell the story, but that we don't know how many people in the real world who have a tumor of that size who never go to the doctor. And we don't know what happens. You know, they could die quickly, they could live long lives. We just don't know. So the point is that the data on which all of these findings are based are not quite as reliable as we'd like to think. Now, they're not useless, but the first thing is that since if in the past people used to believe that a diagnosis of cancer was a death notice, you know, and so you need to break that link. And one of the ways to break that link is, as I've just said, to make them aware that the data are probabilities, not absolutes, that things change. So since the data that is being used to inform their cancer is not brand new, and that there have always been spontaneous remissions. My mother had, and this is probably why I have spent so much of my career studying health. She was diagnosed with, she had breast cancer, and the cancer had metastasized to her pancreas. And I don't know if you know, or your listeners know, but that's the end game, pancreatic cancer. And then all of a sudden it was gone. It was just gone. She had no cancer. And the medical world can't explain that. And we don't know how common that is in the world at large, because imagine that you're not somebody who goes to the doctor regularly and you have all the symptoms and then they go away. How would you know you had them in the first place? So the numbers need to be questioned, which to me leads to a lot of hope. And I think also that with respect to things like cancer, let's say you have stage 4 cancer and you're very depressed. You might want to ask yourself, if you only have a short time to live, is this the way you want to live? By the excess of stress and unhappiness and so on. So I think that in general, I was going to write a book a long time ago questioning whether there's life before death. Well, most people were questioning life after death. That sometimes you get these diagnoses that are terrible and scary and what have you, but it's only at that point that people come alive, realizing that, gee, they may not live forever. So do they really want to be having that argument they're having, or not taking that trip they want to take, and so on. And so, as I said in one of my books, that it's time to come alive while we have the opportunity, rather than be sealed in unlived lives.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, as you say, how people shift when they shift their consciousness. And one of the groups that inform my book as well is multiple personality disorders. And so I'm really intrigued by how, let's say there's one guy who has 15 different personalities, and in all but one of them, he's deathly allergic to orange juice. But the minute he shifts into the consciousness known as Timmy, doctors can watch real time as those blistery hives completely disappear.
Yeah.
And it's almost like he's come alive in a different way, and his body can no longer hold on to that allergy to orange juice. Yet he hasn't been to the gym, he hasn't reduced his sugar, he hasn't taken allergy medication, he hasn't done any of those things. And I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
I think it all follows directly from this mind-body unity. And that the problem is that you have to believe it completely. And you know a lot more about these multiple personalities than I do. But I would assume that for these people, when they are one of these people, they are fully that person. And so then we have an integrated mind and body, and whatever that person is, they will be, which might be quite different from this other person. That, part of the reason that I developed the attention to symptom variability idea was because the counterclockwise work shows what we're capable of, but it's very hard to put yourself in a whole different place and believe you're in that whole different place, on your own. Placebos work when you believe that it's real medication. If you think it's a placebo, even if you want it to be real medication, it tends typically not to be as effective. Sometimes it's still effective, but not as effective usually. And so the attention to symptom variability, okay, let me take a step back. So with all the work on the mind-body unity, what we have is showing just how much control we actually have. Now we know that. Why, let's go back to a placebo. Do you need somebody in a white jacket who's called a doctor to give you a pill that's just sugar, a sugar pill, for you to get better? Clearly, you're the one who's controlling your body. And so why not do that more directly?
Yeah, and I mean, isn't it true that we respond to bigger pills with more of a placebo? The more expensive the medication, we respond better to a more expensive medication,
yes, exactly.
even when it's a placebo. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
The other bit of research that I wanted to ask you about was your work with vision. Because I think there again, we have this idea of deteriorating vision. And I actually had to
Yeah.
change my eye doctor because I went for an examination, and I was quite pleased that my eyes were just the same as they'd always been. He said to me, "Don't get complacent." He said, "The next time you come, it will have decreased dramatically." So I
Yeah.
had to leave
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
But tell me about
Okay.
some of your work.
Okay. So yes, surely. Well, first we found an improvement in vision in these elderly men. All right, that just by living at the retreat in the counterclockwise study. Then we've done several studies where we improve vision just by changing circumstances. When I go for an eye test, I'm bizarre. We've already established that. And so, when you show me an eye chart where the letters get progressively smaller, what occurs to me is that somebody is expecting that soon I'm not going to be able to see. So we did a study where all we did was change the eye chart. So now the letters get progressively larger, thereby changing the expectation. Now soon I will be able to see. And when we do that, people can see what they couldn't see before. But now the vision idea, as with all of our problems, so to speak, is that we hold things still when in fact they're varying. So when you go to you get an eye exam and you're told what your vision is, it's ridiculous. I mean, that's what your vision is on that day, at that hour, in those circumstances. I'm fond of saying that when I'm hungry, I can see the restaurant sign at a much greater distance. I see differently in the morning than I do late at night, and so on. Things change. And if you were aware of that, then rather than rush to get glasses, if you find that you have difficulty seeing at 3 p.m, maybe you need a nap or a candy bar, an energy bar instead. So that, but once you have a vision problem, even if it's minor, and you start wearing glasses, you become dependent on them. And so you're training yourself to need them. And, I tell the story, I just read about this in my new book. One evening, I used to wear a contact lens in one eye. And that evening, I'm struggling to get the contact lens out. And I can't get it out. And I'm killing myself, hurting myself in this attempt to take out. And all of a sudden, I realized I never put it in. That's why I couldn't take it out. And my next thought was, well, gee, I saw fine all day and I never wore them again. And so I'm 73 right now, and I don't wear glasses. That doesn't mean at every moment my vision is perfect. But when it's not, I don't rush to assume now everything is on the decline.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said for this idea that everything is on the decline. And, your book, Counterclockwise, just, I think, layers research about why we have to watch what we expect and watch what we tell ourselves, because we literally are signaling ourselves with those expectations and changing our biology. And I love where you say, you've come to decide that biology is not our destiny.
Right. Right. Well, in fact, I'd go a step beyond that. It started out with the medical world, and I have a lot of respect for the medical world, although what I'm going to say doesn't sound that way. But it started out where everything was medical. And then the next phase is realizing psychology matters. But there's a phase beyond that where I think we recognize that it's all psychology. So meaning we have, again, enormous control.
Saying that, one of the studies of yours that I think most mind-boggling to me was your one that you did with hotel maids, where they change their bodies in remarkable ways. And, we've got such a thing about exercise and going and working out and gym. Can you tell us a little bit about that study?
Okay, well, this is the second test after the counterclockwise of the mind-body unity idea. We went to chambermaids, and the first thing we asked them was, how much exercise do you get? And what was interesting was that they didn't see that they got any exercise, because they thought exercise is what you do after work, and they were just too tired. Okay. So then we taught half of them to see their work as exercise. We said making a bed is like this or that, machine at the gym, and so on. So at the end of this, we have two groups. One group that's oblivious to their work being exercised, one group who now sees their work as exercise. We took many measures before we started this, and then measures after a short time after. And what we found was they weren't eating any differently. They weren't exercising any more or any harder. The only difference was a change in mindset. My work is exercise. As a result, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down from this change of mind.
Just amazing, because I think the average person would say you would have to go to the gym and really work out to achieve that. And I'm also wondering, nowadays everything is tracked. People wear Fitbits, they have trackers to track how many steps they do. So what would you surmise is happening when I've got 10,000 steps I have to do a day and I only do 7,000, and I think to myself, oh, I really haven't exercised?
Well, I think if you have a strong belief that exercise is good for your health, and then you exercise, you will be healthy. But you were talking about the downside. You have that strong belief exercise is good for you, and then because of a cold or some other reason you're not able to exercise over a period of time, it's probably not going to be good for you. But some of that stuff is fun, to see, oh, I've got 10,000. I have friends. I don't, I watched my steps for a short time and it was amusing, but then I couldn't be bothered, but I'm not putting it down. But I have friends who take photos of their, the number of steps they did, and they're in competition, and, it's become a social thing, and that's fine too. The main thing is not that we believe that exercise is not really good for us. The important thing is to recognize that many of the goals that we achieve through that exercise, we can achieve in many ways. It's also the case that, while you're walking around your house, I have stairs in my house, and unless I was wearing, my iWatch that told me the number of steps, that was just, I'm going upstairs to get something. I go downstairs, I go back up. I don't realize that I'm getting exercise. So part of this can be an awareness that you're not the slug that you think you are.
Okay. So and Dr. Langer, just a few words on COVID and mindfulness. What would you suggest to people? Because it seems to me that we are super vigilant and yet not always mindful.
Yes, without question. Now, vigilance isn't mindfulness. When you're vigilant, and an example is, let's say I'm on horseback and I'm racing through the woods and I don't want to be hit by a branch. So I've got an image of, sort of to myself, watch out for the branches. In the meantime, the horse stumbles over a boulder that I was oblivious to. So this mindfulness is in some sense a softer openness where you don't have a particular thing in mind, because it's based on an awareness of uncertainty. So you don't know if that particular thing is relevant or irrelevant. But with respect to COVID, I actually read something about this a while ago about changing from an attitude that many people have of defensive pessimism to mindful optimism. Defensive pessimism is expect the worst and hope for the best. And that's wrong in two ways. The first, you tend to get what you expect. So expectations are only going to leave you stressed and unhappy. But even hope, this was what was interesting to me, was realizing everybody thinks hope is good. I don't think hope is good. Hope is better than being hopeless, for sure. But hope has built into it the possibility of failure. So you don't wake up in the morning and say, I hope I can get a cup of coffee. You just walk into the kitchen and you get a cup of coffee. So what I think that mindful optimism is, you don't put your head in the sand. You say, okay, this COVID is real. What can I do about it? Well, I'm going to wash my hands frequently, wear a mask, do social distancing. And so you have a plan, and now you just go about living. And in doing that, what happens is you're stronger every day. And should something happen, you're going to be better able to deal with it than the defensive pessimism where the stress is wearing you down. There are many advantages to COVID that people won't realize until after it all passes. You know, you can't go out to eat, or probably shouldn't go out to eat if you were used to doing that, and that was a highlight. And so instead you learned how to cook. Well, cooking is a lot of fun. And it's also the case that when you're cooking, you can meet your own needs. You don't have to meet the general needs of people. You like a little less salt, a little more sugar, a little, whatever, and change the recipes. And so I think that people will be eating at home more, not because they have to, just because they've learned to enjoy it. I have a very big community of friends, and during the summer there's one party after the other, and oh, that's fine, and after a while you have to go, but it's the same people. And I didn't miss the parties. I missed the people, but I didn't miss the parties as much as I thought. And so my guess is that when it all returns, it'll be configured somewhat differently. That we will have learned during this time that lots of people are using COVID as an excuse in a positive way. Gee, I can't do this or that because of COVID. Well, that's fine as the first step, but the second step is saying, well, what does please you? How are you spending your time so that you're enjoying it? And, there's a way that the empty nest phenomenon is much more pervasive than people realize. Women think that the kids grow up, they leave the house, and that's the empty nest. But every time you're fully engaged in something and it ends, you're going to have that same feeling. And so there are lots of things that people are engaged in because of COVID that once COVID is past, they will, at first feel a loss. Gee, I enjoyed all that time reading, but hopefully they'll be mindful enough to now rebuild their lives to take advantage of all that they experienced, even though while they were experiencing it, they didn't realize how much they enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think of it as a time of the sacred pause when we've been given.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah.
Reflect and re-energize and redecide, what we really want included in our lives.
Right. Now, of course, everything I've said is less true for people who are less fortunate. I mean, if you have to, if there are 5 of you living in one room, which is going to be true in some parts of the world, that can't be good. But most of the people, I imagine, who'll be listening to us talk now are more fortunate than me.
It also reminds me, just talking about COVID, this idea of fighting against, so we're fighting against COVID, we're fighting against cancer. And I know you've got some rather strong thoughts about fighting against.
Yes, well, it was interesting. I had given a talk, this was so many years ago, and 5,000 people, most of them people who had dealt with cancer. And I was talking about the importance of perceived control and our data on such. And this man asked me a question, and I was startled. And because I have in some of these, he said to me that it sounds like I'm blaming the victim, and his wife fought the cancer at every stage. So my first response to that was about the blaming the victim. No, if the culture teaches you that you have no control, then of course you're going to believe you have no control. And we need to change the information we put out there for people. But the second part I thought more about, which was fighting the cancer. Well, fighting is a metaphor where you've already dignified your opponent to a very high status. And the example I would use is if you had a 2-year-old, or I don't know how old, tugging at your pants, you wouldn't be fighting with the child. It'd be an annoyance, but you wouldn't be fighting. So that the fighting something sound to me again like we had already accepted a strong possibility of loss, of losing the battle. And I thought there was a better way. So
Dr. Langer, 2 last questions. The first one is, when I look at you, I can see Jennifer Aniston in front of me. Is that still going to happen, that movie?
No,
Oh,
No, it was fun for a while. Jennifer Aniston was supposed to play me in a movie that turns out most movies in Hollywood these days don't get made, but I really thought that would. But it was great fun on cocktail party after party where people would decide who should play me. That was the first part that was fun, and seeing, well, what did they really think of me? The second part was they would say who would play them. And I thought, well, how did they come to my movie? But and I got to meet Jennifer. She is, lovely, lovely woman. So it was fun. But now, there have been several attempts at this, and so I haven't given up. But we'll see what happens.
I lied. Actually, I have two more questions now. The next one is, where can people find out about the retreats that you do, where you actually take people back for a week and let them do what you do in the monastery?
Yeah, we're not doing that anymore. No, we should. It's a nice, it'd be a wonderful business, but these things are very time consuming, and and I'm off writing and painting and doing other things. If I got a call from some business or some very wealthy person to set something up, it'd be fun to do. Yeah. But not where people can just sign up.
Oh, that's a pity, because I really think that would be a worthwhile endeavor, because I think.
Oh, I do too.
I think
without question. But it's just that one can only do. I already live 12 lives, and that would be one more than I can handle right now.
Okay, so my very last question is.
Yeah, we'll see.
When you die one day, what would you like people?
I'm not going.
I know, but one day, what would you like people to say about you and your work?
I don't know. I like the idea of. All my life, as I was telling you, as a little girl, trying to tell the other little kids, no, there's another way. So that seems to have been my life's work. So I guess at the end would be for people to come around and for this to be a different world. Right now people live their lives as if it's zero sum. We have winners and losers, and the things that matter are equally available to all of us. And so all of my work, all of my books, in some ways are aimed at making that, increasing the appreciation of that idea. And so if I can accomplish more of that, and if somebody can find a succinct way of saying it to describe me, that would be great.
It strikes me that one of the gifts that you're leaving this world with, whenever it is that you go, and hopefully that's many decades in the future, is that, the stuff that you're teaching is free. You don't have to go and buy pharmaceuticals. You don't have to buy expensive gym equipment. The skills that you're giving them are priceless, and yet they are free. Mm-hmm. And that is a beautiful gift, I think, to leave the world.
Yes. And I also like that there are no negative side effects.
There we go. I like that one too. Dr. Langer, thank you so much for speaking to me. If I had to choose 10 books that if I could only have 10 books to read for the rest of time, Counterclockwise would be in my top 5. I think it is one of the most important books I've ever read. I've probably read it 6 or 7 times, and I'll probably read it another 6 or 7 times, because every time I read it, I notice new and incredible information. It's a book that I think everybody should read. And so I really thank you for not just your years and years of work, but being able to put it together in a way that laymen can really read it and understand it. It's a beautiful piece of work, as are all your others, but somehow Counterclockwise really stands out to me.
Thank you very much.